Greeting everyone. I'm Mohammad Tavakkoli, the inaugural director of the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies at the University of Toronto. I welcome you all to today's session of Rethinking History, Returning to Archives and Documents, featuring Zahir Bhalloo, Dr. Zahir Bhalloo, who will be speaking on archival practices materialized, the Persian and Persianate documents from al-Haram al-Sharif. The Rethinking History Seminar Series is co-convened with my colleague, Professor Arzu Azad of Oxford University, in collaboration with the Invisible East program and the Faculty of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies at Oxford. At the outset, and before introducing our speaker, I would like to express our collective gratitude to Canada's Indigenous people and acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of Credit River. Today, this meeting place continues to be the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live, teach, and learn on their ancestral homeland. I would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to the Roshan Cultural Heritage Foundation and Dr. Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali. Their generous funding has been instrumental in the functioning of the Iranian Studies Institute at the University of Toronto. Their support is not just financial, but also a testament to their commitment to the promotion of Iranian studies worldwide. To introduce our speaker, I would like to invite my colleague, Dr. Arzu Azad, to join. Please, Arzu.
Thank you so much, Mama John. It's a pleasure to be here today after a bit of a break. For me, anyway, I missed the last session, for which I'm very sorry. But I'm happy to see some new faces also today, and I hope you will also find the series in general interesting, which is entitled Rethinking History, Returning to Archives and Documents. And the seed of this was planted when Professor Tavakkoli, Tari, and I were in Maryland at a conference last year. And we thought, why not bring people together in our field of Middle East studies, broadly speaking, that work with documents and archives, no matter from what period. So we've gone as far back as, I think the earliest we've gone is 8th century, and we go all the way to the 21st century. And documents, we consider quite a wide definition of documents. We've had images also presented as documents, and so on. But today, it gives me a real pleasure to introduce my former classmate from Oxford, who now lives in my hometown of Hamburg, Zahir Bhalloo.
No coincidence.
Yeah, what do you think? Zahir completed his doctorate at the University of Oxford, and in fact, both of our supervisor, Edmund Herzig, is also in this call. Professor Herzig, very good to have you here as well. So Zahir completed his doctorate under Professor Herzig's supervision on the practice of Islamic law in early modern Iran in 2013. So gosh, it's been 11 years now. Since then, he has carried out postdoctoral research at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris and at the Freie Universität in Berlin. Zahir is currently the principal investigator of a Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft fund project on the Persian documents from Haram al-Sharif in Jerusalem at the Center for Manuscript Cultures at the University of Hamburg in Germany. He is the author of Islamic Law in Early Modern Iran, Sharia Court Practice in the 16th to 20th centuries, which was published in Berlin last year, and with Said al-Jumani and Konrad Hirschler, a catalogue of the new corpus of documents from the Haram al-Sharif in Jerusalem, which, has it already come out in Berlin?
Yeah.
It's 2024. And besides his interests in Islamic legal documentary culture, Zahir has also published articles in the field of Shi'i studies. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to pass the word to Zahir, who will speak today on archival practices materialized the Persian and Persianate documents from al-Haram al-Sharif in Jerusalem, 13th to 14th centuries. Zahir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Oresu. Let me just share my screen, if that works. Hold on. Let me see. This is it.
Yes.
And you have it, right?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, let me begin by saying it's an absolute privilege and honor to be here. I'm really grateful to Oresu for inviting me. And it's a double honor in some ways because I'm actually speaking in the presence of my thesis supervisor, Professor Herzig, who I haven't seen in a long while. But I always remember and also others who in my academic journey have been very instrumental. Professor Müller, who's here as well, and many others. So it's really special to talk to you about some of my ongoing research. I should say at the outset that I am conducting a lot of my research on these documents from al-Haram al-Sharif in very close collaboration with colleagues from Japan, who have been working on these documents also for a very long time. And we've been doing a very collaborative effort on really deciphering and trying to understand what they're about. And hopefully, if all goes well, next year we will have a publication, or hopefully next year, inshallah, on some of these documents, edited and studies and things like that. So my talk will be divided into 3 parts. I will begin by introducing the Persian and Persianate documents from al-Haram al-Sharif, what they are and where they're from. And next, I will focus really on one single document, which, if I'm not mistaken, may be the only exemplar that we have from the medieval Islamic world of an archival list of documents. This 14th century Persian list of documents sheds very important light on archival practice in the Eastern Islamic world under Mongol rule. By comparing this archival list with other related Persian documents from the Haram al-Sharif corpus, I will discuss the relationship between the list, archival bags, and archival notes which appear on the verso of actual deeds. And finally, I will conclude by discussing the potential of the Haram Persian and Persianate documents in revealing archival practices in pre-Ottoman Asia. So it's really about archiving, but I'm really going to take you through some of the documents as best as I can. So what are the Persian and Persianate documents, and where are they from? So I'll return to the meaning of Persianate later, but the documents were found among approximately 900 Arabic documents which were produced locally in Jerusalem and were discovered since the 1970s in separate batches in locked drawers of the Islamic Museum in Jerusalem. I've put a green arrow there to show you where the Islamic Museum is located today on the Temple Mount, or al-Haram al-Sharif in Arabic. It's right next to the Aqsa Mosque, which you know is the famous mosque associated with the Prophet and the Mi'raj, the ascension to the heavens. The museum itself occupies the halls of 2 historic buildings, the Al-Maghariba Congregational Mosque, and a second building, which probably dates back to the Crusader period or both, or the Ayyubid period or both. Here is a view of the entrance. The reason I'm showing these images of the museum is simply to note that we have no idea how these documents arrived inside this building or when. What has become clear is that at some point, these documents, which were produced outside Jerusalem, became embedded in a much larger corpus of mainly Arabic documents that were produced locally in Jerusalem during the 14th century Mamluk period. We're extremely fortunate in the case of the Haram al-Sharif documents because we have an account of how the documents were discovered in the 1970s by actually a colleague from the University of Toronto, Linda Northup. And thanks to one of the participants today, Anna Stefan, we actually have pictures from Linda of that historic moment of discovery. And that's quite rare because if you look at the other main corpuses of Islamic documents, whether it's the Cairo Geniza or the documents from Ardabil or the documents that Arj works on from Khorasan, we do not have this kind of detail of that moment of discovery. And it's described in this in the volume that just came out in the new corpus. It's called Bringing the Haram Documents to Light, a memoir. I really encourage you all to read this because it's really very special. I have some pictures here of this moment sort of discovery, and you see here that the protagonists who were involved. You have Linda herself in the middle. She was a PhD student from the Institute of Islamic Studies at McGill. And as she describes it, she was in Jerusalem for the weekend, and she discovered, she met with the curator of the museum at the time, Amal Abul Hajj, and that's sort of how in these drawers that had not been opened and sort of the Waqf officials had kept closed, and they said these are just old documents. They opened these drawers and they found this archive of over 900 documents. And then later on, Donald Little, who was also a colleague, former colleague, deceased now from McGill, he was actually somebody I studied with, but at the time I had no idea, of his role in all of this. And he went to Jerusalem and then began this process of cataloging the documents. I have some other pictures here of sort of that sort of initial moment of drawing the lists of what the documents were and taking photographs and things like that. And of course, this was the famous catalog that was published in I think it's 1984. Where Donald Little describes these 878 documents, and he notes that 42 documents were of foreign provenance, and he calls them Persian and Persianate. And Little drew a distinction between documents written in Persian and those written in languages other than Persian, such as in Arabic, but under the influence of Persian or the Persian-speaking world, what he termed Persianate. More recently, in 2019, a new batch of around 97 documents was found in the Islamic Museum, which for reasons which are not clear, Little did not catalog and were not part of the original microfilms. Maybe it's because most of them were in quite a fragmentary state. And so that was probably why. But out of these 97 documents, this was thanks to the efforts of Konrad Heschler, actually, who was in Berlin at the time, and I met him then. He showed me the documents, and we quickly realized that at least 36 of them belong to this Persian and Persianate sub-corpus. So in total, we have 78 Persian and Persianate documents from approximately 900 Arabic documents, which were produced locally in Jerusalem. As I mentioned, we are attempting a study of a good some of them, and that will be forthcoming, hopefully. Now, In terms of typology, these documents consist mainly of administrative orders, receipts, and legal documents, and they're dated between the 13th and first half of the 14th century. The earliest document is dated 1208. And they're quite remarkable because of several reasons. One is the languages that are used. So you have Persian, Arabic, Armenian, Georgian, Turkic, and Mongolian. It's taken me a while to figure out that there were these distinctions. And we didn't know until now that there was Georgian. So this is Armenian, not in Persian script, but Armenian in Armenian script, and Georgian in Georgian script, and Turkic and Mongolian. And apparently the script used for Turkic and Mongolian is Uyghur. So the scripts used are Arabic, Armenian, Georgian, and Uyghur. The Georgian and Armenian element is very exciting. And this was the subject of a workshop that we held in Hamburg last year. We had some colleagues who were specialists in Armenian and Georgian have a look at these documents, and sort of one of the documents mentions, the king of Georgia, David, I think the third, or something like that, and the Georgian nobility at the time. And so it gives us and it has their signatures and all, and the Armenian documents are also very important because of things relating to chronology and dating. I mean, I won't go into all of this because this is not my area of expertise. I'm looking mainly at the Persian and Arabic material, but both the Armenian and Georgian documents and of outstanding historical importance for the modern day state of Georgia and Armenia, because they are these early exemplars, medieval exemplars of their language and their script. So this was just as a side. The provenance of the documents, the 78, is very complex. And what we've begun to see is that we have three clusters. You have an Anatolian cluster, so you have documents which have very clear place names from Anatolia, like Sivas, Kayseri, Kalebalta, Ayub Hisar. Kaysaria is mentioned a lot, Kayseri. Then you have a northwest Iranian cluster, and you have towns like Tabriz mentioned, Moku, Marand, small villages we've identified like Saloleh and others. But a vast majority of the documents belong to this Transcaucasian or Southern Caucasian cluster that is from modern-day Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia, mentioning places such as Ariri, Beylakan, Bardar, Nakhchivan, etc. Now, to give you an example, here is an example of one of these Anatolian documents. This is an administrative document dated 1259. It's probably a tax receipt. It's issued at Sivas and by the royal treasury, apparently, Khezane Amire, of the vassal Seljuk Rum Sultanate under Mongol rule. And it mentions very clearly Ayub Hisar, Kalebalta. And there's another receipt like this. These are probably the only examples of such administrative documents that we have from sort of the very end of the Seljuk Rum Sultanate going into basically under Mongol suzerainty. Another example of an Anatolian sort of document is this draft of a Yarlir, an imperial decree issued in the name of one of the last sort of Ilkhanid rulers, Abu Sa'id Bahadur Khan, and addressed to the local rulers of Kaysaria. There's another fragment that might belong to this as well, but you get an example. But it's clearly a draft because it doesn't have, the standard sort of things that you normally have, like those tamra stamps and other things that you get in this sort of decrees. But I'm going to focus now mostly on the documents which sort of mention Transcaucasia and Northwest Iran. And in these documents, what we find is that a very large number are related to the activities of a certain Amir Arduji Aduchi, probably around 27. And they refer to his activities and to things from, in Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia. And we're only beginning to decipher the puzzle of this Transcaucasian cluster, which is related to the activities of this Amir Aduchi and his family. Donald Little, in his catalogue, did not identify who Aduchi was, but in one of the deeds, deed of acknowledgement and ikrar, dated 1311, his link to the Mongol Chubanid Emirate is very clearly stated. In line 5, Aduchi is described as the Naib of the supreme military commander of Iran, Lashkar-Kesh Iran, Chupan Beg. The name Chupan Beg, however, appears in the margins, and this was a practice from the Ilkhanid period, from the Mongols, of removing the most significant name out of the main text and into the margins as a sign of respect and but who was this Chupan Beg? He's also known as Amir Chupan, and he served as military commander of Iran under three successive Mongol Ilkhan rulers, beginning with Ghazan Mahmud. He gained enormous influence within the ruling Ilkhanid family, and after the disintegration of the Ilkhanate, following the death of its last effective ruler, Abu Sa'id Bahadur Khan, a number of regional dynasties emerged. I have a picture here. So Amir Chupan and his descendants, the Chubanids, they claimed de facto control over former Mongolian core territories of Azerbaijan and Mughal in northwestern Iran until the death of Malik Ashraf, the grandson of Amir Chupan, in 1357. So this Aduji, he's not really mentioned in the literary sources. I mean, we might find him still in the literary sources. There is a Aduji who's mentioned as a kind of chamberlain or a Hajib or something like that, but it could be him, but we're not sure. He clearly was in the service of Amir Chupan, probably in Transcaucasia. And it's likely that all the documents relating to him were produced in this territory under the control of the Chubanids, which you can see here in blue. So there are at least 21 documents which mention Aduchi and his descendants, covering a period of 41 years from 1301 to 1342. I won't go into any detail about these documents. They're of different kinds. So you have lots of deeds of acknowledgement where people are mortgaging, he's sort of lending money to various local people, including Christians and others. He's also buying things like, there's one of the documents, he buys a mine, actually, a salt mine, and there are other documents where he's buying villages and many other sort of slaves and things like that. What is significant for our purposes is that Aduji in these documents had very close dealings with a certain Zakaria. Now, who was this Zakaria? Zakaria was the son of Shams ad-Din Juvaini, the Ilkhanid vizier, very famous vizier and Sahib Divan, Minister of Finance, under several rulers, but especially the ruler Arghun. I mean, he's very well known from Aubin's famous study, of sort of the Mongols and Persian and the Persians and the Mongols. He was Juvaini was a Sahib Divan, Minister of Finance, had a Georgian wife, Khoshaki. He was Sahib Divan Juvaini was executed in 1284 near Ahar in Azerbaijan by the Mongol ruler Arghun on charges of financial misappropriation. In 1289, Arghun ordered the execution of all the male offspring of Sahib Divan Juvaini. 4 of his sons were put to death in Iran, but Zakaria, who was in Abkhaz, that's what the texts, for instance, say at the time, or Georgia, as it was called, Abkhaz, survived. And it's this Georgian exile of this Zakaria, son of Shamsuddin Juvaini, that might explain some of his transactions with Aduji, including, for example, his transfer of the village of Arighi, which he owned as a hereditary fief and Iqtar to Aduji and his children. So basically, this Zakaria gives up a village to Aduji and his children. Here is the document. We know that Arighi is located in the district of Kilakun between Barda in Azerbaijan and Ardabil in northwest Iran. This Transcaucasian cluster document has witness clauses in Persian, in Arabic, in Georgian, in Mongolian, and Turkic. So you get a sense now of this, this group of documents relating to this figure of Aduji. Alongside these Aduji documents, you have another group of documents that relate to another Chubanid official named Timur Bora. All of this has sort of become clear in the workshop that we held in Hamburg, and I think some of you who participated there will find this repetitive, but I will say it for those who were not there. So Timur Bora, we have at least 18 documents relating to this fellow, and he was a Chubanid official, and he served Amir Chupan's grandson Malik Ashraf, and possibly also Amir Chupan's son Timur Tash in Anatolia. So these documents all relate to Anatolia. So what we have is the Aduji documents, Transcaucasia, the Timur Bora documents, Anatolia. Now, how does it all come together? This is what we're trying to figure out, and that's why this list, which I want to discuss today, I think is where we will sort of get a sense of how these two groups of documents related to these two individuals comes together. Just to give you an example of some of these Timur Bora documents, this is an administrative order which mentions the village of Akkui. And you have some other documents. For instance, I edited this one, which is a sale contract, and it's a village that's in probably northwest Iran, which is sold to Timur Bora. But the most crucial document which has come to light in this new corpus of documents from al-Haram al-Sharif is this list, which I want to discuss. The list may belong to or was produced at the instigation of Aduji himself. I thought it was Aduji, but I now think it might even be Timur Bora. So that's the question. We're not sure whether it's Aduji or Timur Bora. Until now, I was unable to decipher a crucial term in the title of the list in Persian. However, thanks to our colleague, who some of you may know, Dr. Ryoko Watabe, a Japanese colleague, her reading of a very crucial textual source, an early Ilkhanid era accounting manual, made it clear that the undeciphered term here was the word kise in Persian, which means bag. And so this is the title of the list, Tafsil Hojjathay Kiseh Chaharom Kiseh Sefid. So list of deeds or documents of the fourth bag, the white bag. I should note that the Persian Izafeh Ya is not noted by the scribe of the list after Hujjat Ha, like we normally write Hujjat Ha. Each of the terms of this title requires some explanation, and I will return to the significance of the term Hujjat last. I will begin with the terms Tafsil, and then I'll focus on the term Kiseh. The Arabic term tafsil is already used in Persian lists that have survived from the pre-Mongol period, from 12th to 13th century Khorasan. Arzu will probably know about these documents from Ghor. So you have lots of these documents, and they all begin with this word tafsil, you know, list of property, or list of all different kinds of lists that have survived. Now, while the term tafsil is attested in earlier documentary sources, The Persian term kise, meaning bag, was hitherto only attested in textual sources. The earliest of these texts is the Ilkhanid era accountancy manual that I referred to earlier, al-Murshid fil Hisab. This work was written in 1291-1292 as a guide to the fiscal bureaucratic system in the early Ilkhanid period during the reign of the fifth Ilkhan, Ghayakh Khatul Khan, and was dedicated to his financial minister, Sahib Divan, Sadruddin al-Khalidi, who was executed in 1298. The text contains a very difficult to decipher, but of course crucial passage on the use of bags, kise, for archival purposes. According to the author, the staff of the financial department had to make inventories or fihrists of documents. When documents were stored together year by year, they were thread-bound and placed in a jaride. Again, we don't know exactly what this meant, this term jaride, probably some kind of folder or file. But what is also interesting is that important documents were placed inside sealed bags, termed kise, so that their secrets would not be known. It's likely that the jaride represented an earlier archival stage of stacking loose-leaf documents before they were placed into the bag. The fact that some of the surviving Persian and Persianate documents do have archival holds does suggest that some kind of tacketing or threading of these documents did take place before these documents were put into the bags. Regrettably, we have no surviving exemplar of an archival bag from the Ilkhanid period. The only physical exemplar of an archival bag that I've been able to find so far comes from East Turkestan. It is a very tiny bag, measuring 11 centimeters by 7 centimeters, and it's presently preserved in the National Museum of the Republic of Korea in Seoul. This bag was discovered intact with a collection of undated tax receipts and other documents in Turkic, in Arabic script, possibly dating from the 13th to 14th centuries, which had been edited and published by Japanese colleague Yoichi Yajima in 2022. It's possible that the bag itself also dates from this period, as the Turkic receipts from East Turkestan resemble very closely the form of the 13th century administrative documents in Persian from Khorasan, associated with various local divans, such as the Divan al-Ikhtiyari, the Divan al-Ard, Divan al-Maliki. It's possible that such divans resorted to the use of bags to preserve documents at a particular archival stage in the life cycle of the document. Of course, the portability of bags no doubt made them very effective for storing documents in the mobile context of the nomadic Turco-Mongol world. We know that archival bags continued to be used well into the early modern period in the post-Mongol Islamic East. And they are mentioned, for example, in Safavid era accountancy manuals, these Siaq manuals from Iran. A more spectacular example, however, appears in an Ottoman manuscript containing several miniatures preserved today in the British Library. The manuscript contains a grandiose metrical history of the reign of Sultan Selim II, written in Persian in 1580 by the court poet Sayyid Luqman. The copy was made for an unnamed person and presented in much later. But in one of the miniatures, we see a scribe or toghronevis writing a toghra on an imperial decree. On his left is a familiar scene. He's someone holding paper and holding an inkwell. But on his left is someone holding a paper and what appears to be an archival bag. In Europe, of course, in an earlier, in sort of the 17th century, there's a famous Flemish painting, which some of you may be familiar with, by Bruegel, the younger, of the tax collector's office. And, you know, we have a room filled with these archival bags that are hanging on ropes, on hooks on the shelves. And the tax collector notary himself appears to be reading a document which is extracted from one of these bags. What is of interest, of course, is how these documents are sort of piled and folded and sort of roped together, which appears somehow to resemble the strips that we know of course, in Islamic documents, of how you sort of make how the documents are rolled and then pressed, and then you have the strip. So this is to give you a sense of these terms, tafsil and kise. Now I want to discuss the term hujjat. Of course, we know this term comes a lot. It comes from the Arabic hujja, and it's routinely applied to legal documents, which could serve as proof in a qadi's court. Although there's the well-known theoretical emphasis in Islamic law on the de jure validity of oral testimony alone, written documents were de facto widely used as proof of all kinds of transactions and agreements. And the authority on this is Professor Müller, who is with us today, as he knows. And there is a specific significance to the term hujjat, because it appears to have evolved at quite an early stage into a type of archival note written on the verso or on the back of deeds. The earliest attested archival hujjat note that I found appears on a deed of acknowledgement from Khurasan, dated 1200, which is in the Khalili collection. But already in this note, you see the characteristic extension of the ta, written without dots. In our case, there are at least 7 surviving deeds in the Haram corpus that are linked to Aduji himself, which all have this sort of archival, hujjat note on the verso. The difference with the earlier Khurasan hujjat note is that in the Haram notes, there's also a brief summary of the content of the deed. So for instance, you have, as an example, you have here a deed of acknowledgement dated 1305 relating to legal proceedings over the ownership of the village of Aghors. We know, moreover, the document confirms this Aduji as the owner of the village. We know, moreover, from a separate purchase deed which has survived dated 1301 that Aduji bought the village of Aghors for 400 gold dinars. This deed of acknowledgement was produced 4 years later and contains this hujjat archival note. Remarkably, we find this exact same note produced in the list. So it sort of reads like, hujjat ru'asa probably, or ru'aya maybe, of Makrud, about the village of Aghors, Dar Babe Aghors. And there's actually another note as well, entry number 47. There's also another note that sort of deals with this village Aghors again, that comes up quite a lot. So we can, this is the only sort of evidence that I have which says that perhaps the person who drew up the list was also Aduji, because he also bought this village. So this is sort of, I'm saying Aduji's list, but that's a hypothesis. It could be a list that was made up by someone else. There is further evidence of links with Aduji and the list. So I mentioned this figure Zakaria, son of Shamsuddin Juvaini, and this Iqta transfer of the village of Arighi to Aduji. There are 2 entries in the list, entry number 27 and entry number 24, which may refer precisely to 2 surviving Haram documents concerning this Iqta transfer. Entry number 24 refers to a writing given by Zakaria concerning the village of Arighi, and entry number 27 refers to the deed of the village of Arighi given by Zakaria. So based on the evidence so far, it's possible that this list, and hence the documents and the archive, belong to this Aduji figure. But now I want to turn my attention a bit to the entries in the list and to give you a sense of the structure of the entries. I have to state here that these are by no means all deciphered. This what I present here are really preliminary readings of these entries, and it's a work in progress. And if you have any ideas in terms of deciphering this, I would be very grateful to hear from you. The entries are always organized in these three vertical columns, usually below the term Hujjat, of which the letter Ta is extended. I already mentioned how this is going back earlier. The entries often mention villages or plots of land. So, for instance, Hujjat Dehe something, Alanji, I don't know. Hujjat Baghe Sahlabad, document or deed of the Garden of Sahl, or directly Hujjat Agors, deed of Agors. And we know this Agors is a village, that was bought by Aduji. In other cases, you have this construction as A'mal from the district or province of, which gives more specifics about where the land in question is located. So for instance, you have Hujjat Dehe something as A'male something. In some cases, there are explanatory clauses specifying the purchase and sale, sometimes in the first person, I think. Hujjat something ke khudra, I'm reading this as khudra be gulami furukhte ast. I don't know, furukhte am, furukhte ast. This is sort of preliminary readings of this. Another one is you have Hujjat, another place name, I'm assuming ke as Amir, probably Amugha something, Kharide shud. This is to give you a sense, but other times you have if the language of the document is in another language, this is specified. So for instance, you have Maktub Bekhat Armani, and you usually have this something written below it, probably Do Adad. I mean, I'm going to return to this, but this is something that's still not clear. Sometimes the entries are much more vague. They mention individuals who are mentioned in the document itself. Hujjat Agha Muhammad Gulami or Hujjat Furush, deed of sale. There is one which I think possibly is Hujjat Waqf, possibly. Some entries, however, begin with the term Hujjat Ha, so probably more deeds. And for instance, this one, Hujjat Hai Kariz, ke Kariz Khanqa, ke as someone Omar Kharide shud, and then Do Adad, probably 2 exemplars, or Dobare, there's also Dobare. So you have this Hujjat Hai Dehe something, Dobare, probably twice, 2 exemplars, two times. So this is to give you a sense of how these entries appear. The list has 55 entries, but since some of the entries refer to documents in plural, Hujjat Ha, we're talking of an archive of over 55 documents. Also, given that the bottom of the list has been trimmed, it's likely that the list was even longer. And given that we're dealing with the list of deeds of the 4th bag, the white bag, we can assume that there were several bags, and therefore the archive held at least quite a large number of documents, maybe 100, even more. As I've mentioned before, we're by no means certain that the list belongs to Aduji. It could be that this list was belonged to the other figure that appears in the Haram Persian documents, Timur Bugha. These 2 Chubanid officials, however, and this is sort of the latest of where I've got to, both appear to be united by their recourse to the same Qadis or family of Qadis, the al-Bukhari Qadis, because there is at least one document that sort of links the two corpuses, the Aduji material and the Timur Bugha. It's a legal document, and the judge is somebody from this Bukhari family, and we know that the other documents from the other corpuses also from the Bukhari family. So at some point there was some crossover of these two sets of documents. But I just want to conclude on sort of saying that it's possible, that the two Mongol officials, Aduji and Timur Bugha, are united by their recourse to the same family of Qadis. In circumstances that are yet to become clear, it's possible that some or all of the documents of the Aduji family from Transcaucasia and northwestern Iran entered the Timur Bugha archive in Anatolia. Later, it is this combined trans-regional, Transcaucasian Anatolian archive of Timur Bugha that ended up in Jerusalem, probably related to the movement of Timur Bugha as an envoy of Abu Sa'id Bahadur Khan. We know that the documents at some stage in the archival life cycle were preserved in bags, archival bags. The contents of only one of these bags, the fourth white bag, has survived in this unique list. And it is this bag, probably along with other bags, that were brought to Jerusalem in connection, probably, with the movement of Timur Bugha. These foreign Persian papers were brought to Jerusalem were in turn perhaps confiscated by the Qadis of Mamluk Jerusalem at the instigation of Mamluk authorities during the turbulent political period at the end of the 14th century, which resulted in the seizure of properties and no doubt accompanying paperwork from the estate of deceased foreign merchants that had settled in Jerusalem from enemy territory, now in Timurid hands. We have one direct example among the Arabic documents of such a confiscation occurring, relating to the property of a Khurasani merchant in Jerusalem named Khaja Miran. So it's possible that also the documents relating to this Aduji Timur Bugha archive were also confiscated by the Mamluk authorities in this period, this very turbulent period. And then somehow ended up with the rest of the Arabic Mamluk documents, many of which are associated with one particular Qadi, and as Professor Müller has shown, with the corruption trial relating to this Qadi. This is sort of the latest attempt at understanding this archival logic of the Persian Haram sub-corpus and its long-distance displacement and eventual entanglement with the non-related Arabic sub-corpora locally produced in Mamluk Jerusalem. These hypotheses, of course, will no doubt need to be refined and modified as the documents are studied in more depth. Do I still have some time?
Yes, you can.
I'll conclude. Okay, I will quickly conclude. Having this presentation tried to give you a sense of the Persian and Persianate sub-corpus of documents from the documents from al-Haram al-Sharif, and in particular on their significance in shedding light on archival practices in the Eastern Islamic lands under Ilkhanid Mongol rule. Such research is significant as part of the recent archival turn in the field of Islamic studies, which has seen scholars turning away from lamenting about the lack of archival repositories from the Islamic world, comparable to those of medieval Europe, and to turning to study what surviving Islamic documentary corpora can reveal about archival practice. By examining surviving Islamic documentaries corpora, scholars have demonstrated that the preservation of records at different levels, private, bureaucratic, judicial, occurred throughout the Islamic world well before the early modern archival repositories associated with the Ottoman Empire. Marina Rusto's recent research on Fatimid state documents from the Cairo Geniza is, and drawing on earlier work by Jeffrey Kahn, brought into light the significance of archival copies, sort of, and the role of the archival copy as really the origin of the more performative, rotulous, long rolls, that are known from the Fatimid world. And more recently, in reconstructing the circulation of 3 Mamluk Daftar sheets, Said al-Jumani and Konrad Heschler have convincingly demonstrated the existence of a large network of archival sites in medieval Jerusalem that were instrumental in preserving documents before they converged into a new estate archive related to the death of a certain Burhan ad-Din who occurs in the Haram corpus. In doing so, al-Jumani and Heschler added an important spatial and temporal turn to the study of archival practices in the Islamic world. Their study of the deliberate creation of Burhan ad-Din's archive, moreover, complements earlier work by Christian Müller, who, working with documents from the same collection, demonstrated the creation of a judicial archive in a corruption trial against the Shafi judge of Jerusalem, Sharaf ad-Din. In our case, we have probably a household archive of a Chubanid official, Aduji, which would later come to include documents related to his descendants and thus become a family archive, and which then end up with another sort of group of documents relating to this Timur Bugha. The link between these two individuals is not clear, as I've said, but the list provides very important material evidence for the preservation of documents in bags and the creation of inventories of documents, which hitherto was only known from literary sources. Aduji's list with his color-coded bags, in this case, we have the list of the contents of the 4th white bag, can be contrasted alongside earlier material artifacts of the preservation of books and documents mentioned in Abbasid literary sources, such as saddle bags, khurj, mindil, other bags, jars, baskets, chests, and of course the qimatr, usually translated as a kind of bookcase, which contained the Qadi's Diwan or court archive. Of all of these, only intact jars containing documents are known to have survived. The most famous, of course, being the jars found at Naqlun in the Fayoum, containing the intact Fatimid family archive of the Banu Bifam. To these material artifacts of the pre-modern archival practice in the Arabic-speaking Islamic world, we must now add the archival list, Aduji's list probably, and the documents of his archive. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Fantastic presentation, and thank you for staying within the time frame of the talks. And as per usual, we will open up the floor now to comments, questions. Lots of accolades here, lots of clapping for you, Zahir. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if you want to maybe close your presentation for now, if need be, we can always open it again if there are specific questions on it. But perhaps I open it up now, and I see we already have our first question from my co-host, Professor Tawakkoli Taghi, please. You are muted, sorry.
Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
Yeah. Dr. Bhalloo, thank you for your brilliant unbagging of the archive and fascinating archival anthropology. I just wanted to note that Professor Linda Northrop was here, and I think she might be still here. And I wanted to recognize that she has joined your talk.
Thank you very, very much. It's a real honor and privilege.
Wow, that is amazing. Dr. Northrop, if you'd like to unmute yourself and say anything, that would be wonderful. I see you're in a car, but
I'm in a car at my car dealer changing my tires from winter to summer. And I saw that it was I was hoping I'd be finished before the lecture. I was a little bit late coming, but here I am. I'm in the car, and I'm so excited to hear you, Zahir, because there's been sort of a relationship as the new catalog was produced, and it's just amazing to hear what you've been able to discover in your studies of these documents. And I knew very little about this group of documents. So I've learned a lot today. Thank you so much.
Linda, could you tell us something about that moment of discovery that you had?
Well, it's in the preface to the catalog, which is edited with Zahir's help there.
Right, right.
But what I can say is that this was a completely unplanned trip to Jerusalem. Martin, my husband, and I were leaving Cairo. We'd been there for a year or more. We were on our way home, but we had other plans for travel, and we were traveling with a friend, an eminent Coptologist, Stephen Emmel, and he said, oh, he was going to Amman, and we were on the same plane, landing in Amman. He said, you have to come to Jerusalem with me. He finally convinced us, and we were going to stay just for the weekend. But when we got to the British School of Archaeology, the door opened, and it was Crystal Kessler, professor who had been teaching at American University in Cairo, who opened the door, and we were astounded because I knew Crystal quite well, and she knew my husband quite well. He's a photographer, and she was in desperate need of a photographer. So there we were, and the person working with her on, this was for the Festival of Islam in London in 1976, was Michael Burgoyne, who has, of course, published the wonderful book on Mamluk Jerusalem. And when he saw me there and he knew what I had been doing, he said, you must meet Amal Abul Hajj. So that very Monday morning, we went to the museum and I met Amal, and she showed me this old wooden crate of documents. It looked like really dirty old paper, waste paper. But the first one I picked out of the pile was a decree from Zahir Baybars, one of the first strong Mamluk sultans. And I looked at Martin and I said, I don't think we're going anywhere. We're staying in Jerusalem, because Amal invited me to work with her on them. So that's what happened. And Martin eventually found, after he had worked with Crystal on the project to photograph the walls of the Haram, which is what he was asked to do, he found a way to go to Yemen, which he had been trying to do for over a year when we were in Egypt. And he managed to go from Amman, and I stayed in Jerusalem with Amal. And together for several months, we went through the documents trying to figure out what they were, which we could see from the initial phrases, and I've described all this, but in that preface, but we were able to categorize them, and then the two of us trying to decipher them. Neither of us experts on documents. I'd seen Qala'un's Waqfiyya in Cairo, which I discovered by chance there. I've been very lucky with documents, I have to say. And I'm still working on them, but I was in the middle of my thesis, so I didn't continue working on the Haram documents, unfortunately, except in a seminar that we held with Don Little, in which I was participating along with Huda Lutfi, who wrote a book on documents in Haram. So that's sort of how it all began, but it was quite by chance that we stayed in Jerusalem and that I met Amal, and everything just happened after that. So
thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Amazing.
And that seems to be quite a common refrain in many of our talks about how people find documents by chance. So thank you so much. Our next hand here is by Professor Herzig. If you'd like to unmute yourself, please.
Thank you, Zahir. That was very, very interesting. Very different from what you worked on your doctorate, but you've clearly got to grips with these documents as well in exactly the same way that you did with those awful Qajar documents. You've now looked at an awful lot of these Persian documents spanning a very large time scale and also a very wide geography. I think it would be it's certainly very interesting for me, and I think it would be interesting for other participants if you could perhaps say something about how much sort of continuity there is over time and how much variation. I mean, just how much do you have to relearn the ways in which the documents are written and the sort of formal characteristics of them as you move from one epoch to another, or perhaps from one part of the Persianate world to another?
I have to say the toughest documents are the Qajar stuff is awful. It gets worse as it's as they say, sahlu mumtane. There's the ease and there's the difficulty. It's both. You have sections in the earlier documents which are very straightforward to read, and then there are bits that are awfully difficult to decipher. I think, I mean, Arzum could tell us as well with the earliest Khorasan material. Some of it is really in Persian, and it's quite clear. And then of course you've got already in the Mongol period it starts to change, and you have a lot of Arabic reintroduced. So you see this whole this what Donald Little was calling Persianate. You know, you really have documents that are Persian, but it's almost like an Arabic translation. So you have these Arabic clauses, probably under the influence of these sort of, I'm speaking from the legal documents, probably from the influence from the Shurutis, these people who wrote these legal formularies, and you know, wanting to be very precise with so the Persian then takes on that character, and it's almost a translation of these Arabic formulas coming in, and it's less fluid in comparison with the very early stuff. But a very clear break for me is the Safavid period as well. In the Safavid period, you really see sort of again another sort of move in terms of sort of how these documents were produced and prepared, and but the Mongol period and sort of the earlier period, there's a lot of continuity, I think. Yeah, don't know if that was.
Thank you so much, Zahir. While other people, oh, I see there's some comments here, sorry, in the chat. So Christian Müller says, thank you so much, Zahir, for this fascinating talk. Oh, that's just a nice comment, thank you. Sinai Noor says, unfortunately, I joined the presentation late. I was wondering if the Zoom recording will be made available. Oh, sorry, I'm reading. Right. Someone, Zainab Tamasuki, suggested that maybe what you read as what did you say? Dobare or
do adad, yeah.
Dobared as dopare.
Dopare, yeah, that's very good. Thank you. Two sheets, yeah, dopare, that could be possible.
I have to say, I did see that comment, but as I was looking at the images, I didn't see dopare, and I also didn't see dobare. So I wonder,
yeah,
sort of paleographically, it's worth sort of looking at how these letters are rendered elsewhere in the document to see if that might decide.
I mean, as I said, this is the only sort of it is the only list that we know of in this collection, but it's very crucial in sort of understanding, as I mentioned, the two related groups of documents, these Timur Bugha documents and the Aduji documents, and then I mean in Hamburg we were talking about the traveling bag, basically moving, you know, across. And sort of ending up in Jerusalem. But yeah, this is sort of where we've got to at the moment.
I mean, it makes sense, this bag thing. Maybe just to add that, because you said that for the earlier materials, we don't have some of these indications, but something maybe new for you is that we've interviewed, thanks to Nabi Sari, who published the documents, 3 gentlemen who apparently were the ones who found the documents 30 years ago, and we interviewed them at length. We sent a team out, and they interviewed them, and the video is going to come out soon. where you can hear what they said. But what's interesting is that they found them all piled up. So there was no bag, no archival.
Right.
At least not when they landed in these sort of cave areas,
Right.
which are very dry. And so they were just under dust, but no indication of bagging, but then indication of folding. So I'm sure at some point they were folded and bagged, but not at that point. I wanted to ask a question while other people maybe gather their thoughts, which is, do you know currently the state of the library? I mean, obviously, given what's going on right now, and also the state of these documents, and are they? I'm presuming they're no longer in a cupboard or a box.
I have to confess I haven't visited Jerusalem, so I haven't worked with the documents in situ. I mean, I know Konrad has been there a couple of times, Konrad Heschler. Christian Müller is here, who's also seen the documents there. I don't know, I have some pictures of sort of how they're stored today, but I don't have them with me here. But I think they've been put into these sort of plastic kind of folders or something. But I can tell you that one of the challenges that we've had looking at the documents today is that there are many fragments that are missing. So you have sort of documents, and you know clearly that these are two related fragments, and then you've got, of course, a fragment that's not there. And that's a real shame in some cases, in particular some of these documents which are dealing with sort of Armenian text, or so that's. And I think they could possibly be found even if somebody sort of looked for them, I think.
Christian, is there anything you could add to that?
What I could add to that is I have no idea of what is going on today. I can only say that the new documents you spoke about, Zahir, they were there before, they were known before 2019 because I saw them in 2008.
Okay.
But I did not work on them anymore. Yeah.
Right.
And it was our project that we were asked to finance these, putting them into the bags. And so this is the money from the ERC who put them to protect the documents.
See,
Yeah.
okay.
So this is what I could tell you about what's going on in situ.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Are there any more? There's a question here from, well, there's first of all, thank you from Shole Quinn. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. Mustafa Azeri is asking, are you aware of any efforts being made towards digitizing these documents and if they would be publicly accessible?
Well, most of the Haram documents are accessible. They were microfilmed by Donald Little, I mean by the team that, so we have the microfilms that are available digitally, but the images of the new sort of sets that were taken in color, I don't think those are available. And I think the reason for that is probably you have to sort of get an accord with the Waqf, because it is all part of the Waqf of the Haram. And I'm not sure whether we will ever reach a stage where we can put them digitally available online. I would hope so. That would be very useful, but maybe Christian.
Here I can say something because we are putting some of the documents online available in the database comparing Arab legal documents. And at the moment we do those that are already edited.
Okay.
And then we have our specific way of dealing with them. Hopefully we will publish them because we have an authorization of the Haram authorities from long ago. So we might take the freedom to do this. Yeah, so this is...
Maybe I should also add that I have attempted on behalf of our project several times, and I had initially had a positive response from the curator in the Haram to share the images because, as you know, we're creating a digital corpus of Persianate, if you want to call them as such, documents. And we wanted to receive high resolution images. And initially there was a very positive response, but then no responses to several follow-up emails from us. So, and this was before October 7th, so I'm not exactly sure what is going on. But there's an interest of doing it for sure. I think with Christian and from our side and from Hamburg's side, eventually, hopefully, we would be able to do that if they give us the permission, of course. Any other comments, questions for Zahir? I'm sure I mean, I thought your talk was so rich. This Kisa thing was very new. I love it. And I love learning about, I didn't know about these Georgian and Armenian documents, and you've done an incredible amount of work identifying these two groups. So really, mashallah, very
well, as I mentioned, this is not only my work. A lot of this work has also been in collaboration with colleagues in Japan, yes, who've been working on trying to decipher these documents for quite a while now. But I think we're reaching a stage where we have some more information on this than the catalog entries. It were really very helpful by Professor Little. But we now are sort of reaching a stage where we really know that we're dealing with a Chubanid corpus. That's what it is, really, a Chubanid corpus of two individuals, and somehow that ended up in Jerusalem via a bag or something like that.
I'm sure just getting to that conclusion took a long time and a lot of work. And yes, I think it's worth highlighting what our Japanese colleagues have been doing. My understanding is that they have a document reading group that meets very regularly.
That's right.
For Persian, specifically Persian documents. So something definitely to look out for, and maybe Professor Tawakkoli Tari to invite some colleagues also to this.
Yeah.
Very good. Will do.
Yeah.
We have another comment from Zainab Tamasuki. She says, thank you all for this intriguing talk. Have you ever encountered a single meme in the documents or manuscripts you ever studied as a short form for mu'allif, I guess?
Well, I always joke that this is all the detail is in the memes and the wows. But there could be a possible meme like this. I'm not sure. I haven't seen one like this. I mean, the other question I'm interested in is that with Persian documents, because with a lot of the discussion with the Arabic documents, Conrad Heschler and others always talk about the archival holes and sort of, using the strings. Did this ever happen with Persian documents? Because in my work on sort of more recent documents, Qajar documents, early modern work, we have examples of these wooden slabs from the Qajar period, which were used to hold piles of archival copies together. But I don't know whether these wooden tahtes actually they exist they're in the National Archives in Iran. And so you had this notion of making an archival copy of a document is very well known in the Safavid period, the Fard, it's called like Fard, and the Qajar period and all. But I don't know whether whether the Fard was ever put into a bag or was sort of bound up with a rope and then stacked together, something like that. And again, the problem of the register, because you have this term jaride and daftar, which are used almost as synonyms. That this was sort of registered in the daftar or in the jaride
or journal.
Yeah, and I mean, in the Mamluk context, daftar is referring to sheets that were sort of folded in a particular way, not to a book, So I think, but I also think that with sort of Arzu's work with Khorasan, we are going to go quite far now with these documents belonging to these divans, that really come from different sort of individuals and are connected to these. We're really seeing the divan as a kind of archive, I think, of some kind. So it's quite exciting, I think, for future work.
In the Qajar documents that I have collected, often documents are in wooden boxes
Ah,
or
okay.
leather bags with zip, or
Okay.
yeah.
Interesting. Does anybody else know whether they have encountered holes in their documents? Persian documents, I guess, was the question.
Yeah.
Holes through which you would put a
Oh,
thread
right.
staple, to hold them together. I guess not. I mean, we haven't seen holes in our,
Okay.
we see fold lines and so on, but
Because
no.
if you look at the decrees, the Ardabil that were published by Haman, you do see things that look like holes. So I don't know whether, I mean, one would have to look at these documents again carefully, whether these are regular in the same way. But this is it, that you can get lost in all these material questions.
We have more, sorry, we have a comment by Ed saying, I wonder how many archival bags got thrown away by modern archivists who thought themselves were of interest. It's a good point. Yeah.
Yes,
Or the other way around. They saved the bags because they were invaluable and tossed the worthless papers.
That's exactly right. I mean, that's what our three Afghan, bless them, guys told us. They were looking for gold and silver, and they saw all this ridiculous paper that they couldn't read. They said we couldn't read it because the writing was so different, and they just threw them down the cliff. So the people down below collected all these things and took them to the one person in the village who has any interest in writing. So yeah.
Just related to this is that some of the documents that I have been able to acquire, they were saved by garbage collectors. That the families had tossed it out, garbage collectors had saved them and sort of got to me.
Yeah. There's that sacred trash, isn't there, Judith?
Yeah, that's right, that book.
We have a comment or a question and comment by Dilbar Khakzad, who says, thank you very much for your presentation. I was wondering if the documents are dated, and if so, what calendars were utilized?
I think most documents are dated, and they use the Islamic calendar, the Hijri calendar. Although, as I mentioned, the Armenian sections, because you have some documents which have these Armenian sections, and also Georgian, that uses a different calendar. That's quite significant for people who do Armenian and Georgian for the calendar year or something like that. So I think there are some calendars, several calendars.
Yeah, the same goes for the 11th century Khorasani documents. They use the Hijri calendar only, even as early as 1001. Yeah. Could you please reflect on that? I think we've now answered that. Yeah. Okay. Any more questions or comments for Zahir before we let him go to his baby?
Yes.
Any more comments? Okay, it doesn't look like it. Oh, Christian has another one, sorry. Christian,
Yes.
It's not a question, it's what I write on the Jarida, because we were talking about this. And you have here the Transcaucasian jurist who says that it's the annual repertoire of the documents. You will find this in my article on the power of the pen. Look for it. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, it's a term that appears in especially in the archival notes that you find Jarid in the Daftar and Jaride are really used very much interchangeably. And I always thought earlier that Daftar meant a register, meant a book. But now I know that it can also refer to sort of, a file of some kind, not necessarily a book. Yeah, I think these terms are very interesting, and you need to look at it on a local level. And and to understand it in that way. That's
Wonderful. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for that additional comment, Christian. Thank you so much for all, first of all, to Zahir for giving such a fantastic talk. And I think lots of people are feeling inspired by your work. So keep
Thank you.
going. Thank you all of you for joining and for participating. And we look forward to seeing you for our next talk, which is next month. And also, I forget actually what the topic is. Would you know?
It's
By any
on
chance?
constitutionalism.
Constitutionalism.
The title
And-
will send soon.
Okay, we will be in touch. And do you happen to know the date? I'm just looking it up now. It's on the 9th of May
That's
with Nuri Sohrabi from the University of Göttingen. So to see as many of you there as possible. Thank you so much and have a good night. Or good
Zahir,
day.
thank you for your brilliant presentation and inspiring presentation. Now I will be much more cautious before I open the bags and the folders and boxes in which documents are and study them much more carefully and try to preserve their integrity rather than taking them out and filing them in a variety of different places. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
And thank you, Linda, for joining us. It was
Thank you.
really
Oh,
awesome
it
to
was my
see you.
pleasure. I was so excited to see Zahir presenting, so I'm glad I was able to be here despite the tires problem.
Thank you. It's a real honor, and I'm really honored by your presence and all the other participants, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mueller, for joining us, and Arzujan, thank you much.
Ramadan.
Till next week.
Bye, Judith.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.